Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Dr. Bernada Nicole Baker. She's a community psychologist, empowerment coach, author, professor of psychology, and a motivational speaker. She is also the founder of the Princess Within Foundation, and she is one of those people that we talk about every single morning, that we ask you to be the change that you want to see. Not only is she changing the lives of young girls, she's also changing the life of a toddler. We welcome her from Houston, Texas, where everything is big, to the OPT Network. Dr. Baker, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And so let's talk about the journey, Dr. Baker, to empowering girls in the spirit of excellence. How does that happen for you?
So I just started empowering girls. So I was a part of a mentoring organization 15 years ago at my church, and the organization actually fell apart. And so once it fell apart, the girls were still like, we need you to mentor us. And so I kind of just, kept them on my roster, worked with them daily, and I knew that I had the tools that they needed in order to excel academically. And so I stuck with them. They were like my two, my prototypes, or my research experiments, if you will. And, one thing just led to another, and the girls just came. And so what I was saying earlier was that I didn't write the vision for the Princess Within Foundation initially. It kind of just started. I was already doing it. And then I went back and wrote the vision for it. But I was already in the trenches, in the mix of, empowering these girls and just helping them with as much as I could.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about writing the vision, because as believers, we understand writing the vision. Tell us about that piece.
So I did my research, and I looked at the demographics of African minority girls who were from disenfranchised communities, girls who had absentee fathers, girls who, had limited resources, and all of the above. And so I knew that there was a market for it. And I wasn't driven by the money effect or anything like that. I was driven by the opportunity to really impact the lives of these young women. And so once I started, we just got started. It was amazing watching the results of the girls.
Mm-hmm. And so were they really receptive, especially when you talk about girls from disenfranchised areas that are not really necessarily connected to a family? Were they open to your impartations?
They were very open to it. And I think they were open to it because I was relatable. And because I provided them with cultural exposure. So we did like tea parties downtown at the Drake Hotel on Michigan Avenue. I did a lot of like dance parties with them, like hopscotches or what have you. So I did a lot of sleepovers, pajama parties. So I made it very fun. And the girls saw that. I think I was very young. They saw that I was very young, that I was educated. I think by that time I had already obtained my 2 master's degrees and my bachelor's degrees. And so they knew that I had charted a course, a path of success, and they were really interested in learning how to best navigate so that they could follow in my footsteps. And some of the 2 girls that I started off with, one of them received like a partial scholarship to college. Even while she was still in high school, she was receiving, awards and scholarships and all of the above. And so I have a picture still from that day when she was awarded. I can't remember the exact amount of money that she was awarded, but I was there to help her, to support her. She received her check, her scholarship check. And she actually ended up going to the same college that I went to. So they were very receptive of the mentorship that I provided.
And so once you started doing research in girls, you had your father there, but your mom, you were raised by your father. But when you started looking at girls that were missing fathers, as are many in minority communities, what were you able to tell them about being true to themselves and not looking to a male figure for that love that maybe they were missing?
Well, I think first of all, we had to acknowledge that it was a problem.
Okay.
Because most of the girls, because their fathers were absent, they thought they were the majority. So they were looking crazy at the girls who actually had fathers. And so, we become so comfortable in our dysfunctions that we only know what we've been exposed to. And so just in having conversations with them, looking at the missing gaps in their lives and identifying, the areas where they had not been affirmed or they had not been supported by a male figure. And, I would always tell them, like, be mindful of these little boys out here. Like, don't let a little boy buy you a Happy Meal or some Jordan gym shoes, and then you think that that's what love looks like because you didn't receive that from a father. And so that's really the message that I pushed. I always push the 7 B's, which is books for boys, because boys brings babies. And really just I really was very intentional about empowering the girls to really get to know themselves and to figure out, what they liked about themselves and to figure out their own path in life rather than trying to couple up with somebody looking for that love that they did not receive from their father figure.
So I think this is really important, and I want to go back to it. You said, first of all, you have to know that it is a problem. Were they open to saying the missing or the longing that they had? Did they understand that in a real way, that they didn't have that affirmation and all of the things that having a man in a young girl's life brings? Did they understand that?
So at such an early age, I think kids are so impressionable. Of course, initially, I don't think they got it. But the more conversations we had about it, the more heart-to-heart conversations we had about it, the more examples I gave them, they got it. And once they got it, they held on to it. And they began to, do mirror reflections and just do their work. As early as 12, 13, 14, 15, I have my girls doing work. Like, we're doing real-life work. One of the biggest challenges that I had with the girls was that once they would begin to question their mothers about their fathers, those are some hard conversations to have. And oftentimes parents don't really, especially single mothers, don't necessarily want to have that conversation. And just because the girls are ready to explore that missing piece in their lives, that does not necessarily mean that the mothers are in that position and they're ready to explore that area. So that's actually the difficulty that I was facing, was that I was unveiling these truths about, the real life experiences of the girls, and they weren't able to really go forward or move forward, getting the answers or the insight that they needed from their mother. So that was a challenge.
Okay. And so in that process, I think that's really another key factor. When mom doesn't want to talk about it because dad is absent and he refuses to be a part of a young woman's life. So then do you at that point talk to the moms and say, hey, this is a conversation that you absolutely have to have? Or how do you move past that? Because it doesn't come down to, family of origin issues from there?
It does. And so it has really been a problem. Let me say that. It has not been an easy issue to address. And that's, again, has been one of my biggest challenges, working with more so the parents than the girls, if you will. And so, I have had many conversations with the parents individually and collectively to let them know that their experiences were not isolated experiences, that, we had other girls and other mothers who were, trying to break the barriers of the walls that had been built around this whole issue of the absentee father. And so once I told the parents, look, I can't do the work with your girls if you're not willing to do the work with me. And so I need you. This is like a marriage. We all have to do our part in order for this to be successful. And so I had a lot of buy-in from our parents. And then just, it was one thing for me to try to work to help their girls with their self-esteem and empowering them with the tools that they needed to excel academically. But there were some resources and some information and some support that I needed from the mothers that was critical to the work that I was doing. And so once I was able to just leverage, my expertise, my own experiences with being raised by my father and understanding the value of having a father, there was much more support and buy-in.
Let me get a quick break here, Dr. Baker, but when we come back, we'll explore that more. Also, the princess within, and how Dr. Baker just really was so selfless in adopting a small baby and how all of that happened. Stay on point. We're back with more right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Dr. Bernada Baker. She's a community psychologist, empowerment coach, author, professor of psychology, and a motivational speaker. And her mission in life really has become empowering girls to be their best self and attain excellence. She's also the founder of the Princess Within Foundation. And before we went to break, Dr. Bernada, you were talking about really understanding the girls and getting the parents to buy in. But you understood it intrinsically. Though you had your father there, you didn't have your mother there. Talk about why your father raised you.
So my mother became addicted to drugs actually when I was 8 years old. And so I made the executive decision at 8 years old. I always tell people I have about 10 years on my life because I was making executive decisions at the tender age of 8. But I made the executive decision that I was no longer going to live with my mom, that I was going to move with my father because the living environment was unhealthy due to my mother's drug addiction.
Did you did you understand it, Dr. Baker? Did you understand?
Go ahead. I understand that.
Yeah, that your mom was, did you understand sort of drugs and what your mother was doing? Did you have a real understanding of that at 8?
Oh, I did. Yes, ma'am. I had a great understanding of it. I have a younger sister, so she was 4 years younger than me. And so I knew that I needed to protect her. And so I knew that I had a great understanding of it, so much so that we lived in Detroit. And when we went to Chicago for a weekend visit or something, I think we went for a funeral or something, I told my dad, like, I'm not going back there. They're doing drugs in the house. It's unhealthy. We don't need to be there. And I didn't go back. I had to speak to the judge and, tell the courts what was going on. And I was totally fine with that. So at the tender age of 8, yes, I had a very clear understanding.
Was that, as you got to be a young woman, is that the driver for becoming a psychologist?
So I don't know that was the drive before. I just think I always had a passion for helping people, just helping people. Like I wanted to serve in whatever capacity. Now, I did understand firsthand what it looked like to be a part of a system that, that didn't look like everybody else's system. And so being a motherless daughter, if you will, I was great. My story was a little unique because I had a great father, I had an amazing stepmother, and I had 2 dynamic, extraordinary, phenomenal grandmothers. And so although my mother was in the streets, I never, that's the life that she lived in the streets. That's the life that she lived in the streets, but I was never exposed to that life. So I understand firsthand, a lot of kids don't necessarily, Bella, stop it. A lot of kids don't necessarily get that experience because of all the other environmental influences that are around.
Mm-hmm. As an 8-year-old making that executive decision, as you call it, what kind of weight is that for you at 8 years old?
Well, you know what? At 8 years old, I didn't really see it as a weight. I saw it as an unfortunate reality, but I think that my family did such an amazing job of sheltering me from the reality that my mother was on drugs, that they gave me everything. They provided me with, I never missed a beat. So I always had the best of everything. So I don't think it was until I got into my 20s that it was a painful reality that, I didn't grow up with a mother. And, so I do have mother issues. And so, I don't think, it really hits you. And one thing I always tell my family, or I tell the girls that I work with, is that sometimes our families can overprotect us and not empower us to deal with the realities. Like, rather than talking to me about my mother's drug addiction, they bought me gifts. And so I had to wait until I was an adult to really explore the underlying issues of not being raised by my mother.
Mm-hmm. So though it was different, you were, as you say, a motherless child. On the other side of the coin, you're dealing in many respects with girls who are fatherless children. And so how do you bring those two together to help them understand that you understand their challenges in a very real way?
I do. I think I just make it relatable that, you are you're a character in whatever movie you come from. And so whatever your truth is, whatever the root of your foundation is, you can't separate from your identity. So I can't separate from the fact that my mother didn't raise me, the fact that my father raised me, all of the above, that I have a heart for girls because I understand what it looks like not to have that missing link to your life. So whether it's your mother or your father, whatever that missing link is, the root of it is that you have to address whatever those issues are. And those things that you don't confront, they'll end up confronting you. And so I always make that message very relevant. And I just tell them, that it'll spiral out. It'll spiral out into other issues. And so you could possibly, have self-esteem issues. You end up bullying somebody or being the mean girl because of those issues that you didn't deal with. And so now you're taking them out on somebody else, or, you know, you're codependent on a little boyfriend because you're looking for love in all the wrong places, or you feel like you need to have a baby in order to fill that void of love. And so, you know, or you're trying to mask the pain, so you start drinking or smoking. So there are a number of different factors, you know, a number of different categories that the girls can fall into. And so I think it's relatable across the board.
Sure. And so for you, Dr. Baker, was there a time when you had to deal with the shame, that the same shame that these girls now are going through, or is there a shame now of, you know, dad being unavailable, being absent?
So I think the shame was when I went to college and my grandmother was there and my father was there and my mother wasn't there. And it was just like, well, why did I have to have this family dynamics? Like, why, you know, why was my life set up like this? And so I think that when you're looking at other people's situations, it will cause you to wonder or question or possibly even resent whatever your circumstances are. Once I went through counseling and I worked through those issues and I, you know, resolved that it wasn't anything personal. My mother had a drug addiction, an illness where she was just not in her right mind and she couldn't do, you know, the drugs overpowered her. I understood it as a illness more so than a personal decision, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so there is no shame. I wouldn't change any of what I've gone through because I believe that it has definitely helped to shape and mold me into the woman of God that I am today. And it has definitely catapulted me as it relates to my call to ministry and just my heart for girls and women.
Mm-hmm. And what do you say to your girls about not feeling the shame of something that they absolutely had no control over?
So I live my life by a quote that says life is only 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you respond to it. And so for me, that was only 10% of it. 90% of was how I responded to it. So did I do my work? Yes. Did I make sure that, you know, the broken pieces of my heart were mended? Yes. Do I forgive my mother? Yes. Am I grateful for her creation, for her giving life to me? Yes, because I've been able to be a blessing in the world. So there were so many great things that happened. That it overpowered the unfortunate realities.
Wow. And so for girls that are saying, especially that their mothers don't want to talk about why dad is absent, and really moms may be falling in some of the traps that you're telling them not to fall in, thinking that, you know, if you have this child, he'll love you more, he'll stay. What do you say to them about those unfortunate realities that it's just not going to happen?
I just tell them, like, you're only responsible for yourself. So even if mom doesn't want to do the issues or mom doesn't want to deal with realities that have been created, you're responsible for yourself. So you cannot use, you know, your circumstances as your crutch or your excuse to why you decided to do something different. You know, that the situation, the blockage, the barrier, whatever that mountain is, you know, that's only 10% of it. And so I don't buy into excuses of, you know, well, my daddy is not here, so I'm acting out. No, well, your daddy isn't here, so how can we work through why you're acting out, or what do we need to do in order to, you know, fully process so that you can still be your best self, even in the midst of your daddy. I think that oftentimes we allow children to make up, you know, to get away with things because of their realities, because of the unfortunate experiences that they have experienced, rather than empowering them to stand tall in the face of adversity and in the face of the experiences that they have, you know, had to deal with, and empowering them to be overcomers rather than victims of their circumstances.
I love it. Let's get a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll talk about how Dr. Baker's life changed literally on a dime because she was trying to be the change that she wanted to see. Stay on point. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Dr. Bernada Nicole Baker, and I feel like I am on her sofa, literally and figuratively, because, you know, some of these issues, Dr. Baker, that women have, especially I think when we come from minority communities, sometimes those issues are never resolved. How do you help people that are going through that are helping and mentoring girls to maybe not necessarily resolve the issues, but put them out on the table so that they can begin the work?
So, again, people have to be at a place where they're willing to do the work, where they're open to accepting and addressing their realities, and where we're no longer living in in a world, and we're seeing our experiences through rose-colored glasses, if you will. So it's a lot of truth-telling. There are a lot of tears that come along with this process of understanding and, fully living in your truth and walking through the process of healing. I encourage people wholeheartedly. Even in my classroom, my students are always like, Dr. Baker, we feel like we're in therapy in your classroom. Can we just record this? Can we make it a podcast? What's happening? I think people are yearning for truth. I think people are yearning to have those broken places of their lives and their hearts mended. I think people need to hear more of the message that broken crayons still color. Like, I am not what happened to me. And so I think people are underexposed, and I think that, there's a small majority of people who are really ready and available and willing to do that hard work, that self-work. I think in the society that we live in today, with social media, with education, with access to all these materialistic items, it's so much easier to deal in the non-reality and the fluff of society than it is to deal with the pains of your heart.
I love that. Broken crayons still color. That is, that really should give us all pause. And I asked you during the break, where does that wisdom and that sanity and that acceptance, for who your mother was, and she's recovered now, but all of the things that you lost, where does that come from?
And so I said my grandmothers were my best friends, both of them actually. I was the first grandchild. So I've always had an old spirit, old soul, always hung out with the elders of the church, was always sitting with the elders of, at the feet of my elders. All my life I've always had older friends. Like, before I left Chicago, most of my best friends were like 50 and I was 35. Mm-hmm. So I think it just comes from that. I love Peebo Bryson and Frankie Beverly and Mays and Anita Baker. So I've always been ahead of my time, and it could be, as a result of making those decisions early on. But I've also always had a relationship with Christ. So I can remember, at the early age of 12, accepting Christ as my Lord and personal Savior and just being so excited. Both of my grandmothers kept me in church, and just the manner in which they lived their lives as related to not holding on to, unforgiveness and being bitter and all of that. And I'm just I am light. I am love. And so darkness and bitterness and holding on to grudges and anger, those things don't match up with who I am, who I was created to be. So I think half of it is DNA. I think half of it is influence from my grandmothers. And I think the other part is definitely the spirituality and the intentionality about living the life that I desire to live and being who I desire to be in the earth.
And so what does your grandmother, your maternal grandmother, say to that 12-year-old girl that has found Christ and is probably praying for her mother to be healed and whole? What does she say to you about where your mom is at that point in her life?
We didn't have a lot of conversations about my mom growing up. We really didn't. We knew she was in the streets. My mother got shot in the heart by drug dealers when I was 13. They called the house. I answered the phone first. I didn't know they were going to come and shoot her. Because she owed them money for a drug debt. And so I think that more so than anything, I teamed up with my grandmother, and we offered my mother assistance. We put my mother in every, drug treatment facility that was in the city of Chicago. So I think rather than actually talking about it, my grandmother was showing me. She was demonstrating grace for my mother's life, the life that she had chosen to live. She was demonstrating support. She was demonstrating love in spite of and despite of. And she gave my mother all that she had to give until the day she left this earth. And so, my grandmother instilled in us the value of family and the value of love and, just the value of just being there for people no matter what. And so that's where I believe I got it from.
Wow. And was there never a time as a young girl that this great God that your grandmother loved and introduced you to and you came to know as your Lord and Savior, was there never a time why you never wondered why this great God hadn't delivered your mother?
I think in my early 20s, like I was, just wanting so badly for my mother to be delivered. But I understand that, number one, you can't want something more for a person than what they want for themselves. Number two, my mother was not in her right mind. The drugs had definitely overpowered her mind. And sometimes people think that they're stronger than whatever their addiction might be, but oftentimes we're not. Number three, I believe that the God that we serve, that he will give you his perfect plan for your life, and he'll give you his permissive plan for your life. And so my mother chose to go back to the streets. My mother chose to go stay in the streets even after she got shot in the heart. So I don't feel like it was God who kept her out there.
No, absolutely not. And so after all of this process and your mom heals, what's the relationship like today?
So, there isn't a relationship. I could tell you a story, make up a story and tell you that there was, but there isn't.
We don't want you to do that.
She lives in Chicago. She is sober. She's never really been a mother, not that I can really fully remember. And, the maternal disconnect has just been there, and it just is what it is. And so she doesn't take any real responsibility for not being a mother, or, is not necessarily verbally apologetic to my sister and I. And I respect her for that. Like, that's her life. She has to live her life. She has lived her life according to the choices that she's made and what she wants to do. She loves Bella. She follows, us on social media. But I don't have the maternal connection with her. I have exhausted my resources of trying to help her and, sending her to all treatment centers. And I even flew her out to Florida one time for a 9-month treatment recovery program. I've invested a lot of money in helping her get on the good right foot. And so, I pray for her daily. And I think that just because you forgive somebody doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be fully engaged in a relationship with them. She's not in that space mentally and accepting of that.
Wow. Let me get a break here, but when we come back, we'll tell you about what all the chatter is in the background of Dr. Baker's house and how she came to have this wonderful little girl by the name of Bella. Stay on point. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. What an incredibly eye-opening conversation that we are having with Dr. Bernada Nicole Baker. She's in Houston, Texas. She's an implant to Houston from Chicago, and she is the founder of Empowering Girls in the Spirit of Excellence, while sharing her own journey through excellence and how it's possible through truth. But something happened in your life during Hurricane Harvey. I know, being in Chicago, you weren't really familiar, I guess, with a whole lot of hurricanes and storms, but you were in Texas when Harvey happened. So walk us through how the storm changed your life.
So it's how the storm changed my life. And so I was not impacted by the storm. I actually made it out to Dallas while Harvey hit. And because in 2015, I was here and I had lost my truck. So when I heard that we were having a flood or what have you, I got out of here. I was already traumatized by the loss of my vehicle. I was like, me and my vehicle, we're out of here. So I fled to Dallas and was, safe there. But while I was in Dallas, I was working. I was literally, doing Harvey relief work via social media, directing people to resources and calling on other resources and telling people where to go and where they needed to pick up. It was so funny because my girlfriends out of state were like, Bernada, you took over the news reporter's job. How did you know all the resources? So I was just on it. Look, we got to get out here and hit the plow. That's just the way I was raised.
Right.
And so I was working. And so a volunteer had actually come down from Pennsylvania, and he had heard about the story of Bella and her father, who were living in a car at the time of the flood. And so when the flood hit, their car got washed away or whatever in the flood, and
so
they were homeless.
Wait, slow down for me a little bit, Dr. Baker. So first of all, bring us up to speed about Bella and her dad, Eric, who were living in a car in Houston before the flood. How did you find out about that story, or about those people?
A volunteer from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
He saw my profile on social media on Facebook, and he saw that I was a part of this Harvey relief group, and he saw that I was the founder of the Princess Within Foundation, and I was a psychology professor, and he just inboxed me. I don't know how, but he inboxed me and was like, hey, I have this single father living in he's in a motel right now with this 8-month-old baby girl. He was like, I came down, I brought some resources, but I have to go back home, and they need a connection in Houston. So he was like, would you help them? Can you connect them to a social worker? So I was like, sure. So I had a number of families that I was working with, and I mean, they were just another family on the list. So it was no immediate rush for me to get to them. So I finished up with the churches and the families that I was working with. It probably was about 3.5 weeks to a month later when I finally got over to Bella and her dad. And when I did, he just told me some of the items that she needed. I raised some money, got her a bed, got her some clothes, went to just drop that off. I was like, oh, she's a cute little thing, cute little chunky munchkin. And that was it. Like, that was all. There was nothing else to it. I was just like, oh, Facebook, here's a picture of her. We dropped off the items. Thank you all so much. And so I stayed in contact with her dad and got the backdrop story that her mom had left her when she was a month old, and dad had been raising her, but it had definitely been a hardship. And I started sharing with him job resources or what have you. And when he would go on the interview, I would be like, well, he didn't have any next of kin. His parents were deceased or what have you. And so I would be like, well, you can just bring her over here. I'll babysit. And that was it. So he brought her there. I babysat her probably about 3-4 times. And I was like, oh, she's cute. Okay, all right, I'm going to keep her for a few hours, come back and get her. Again, I was single with no children. My family was like, oh, she's so cute. Everybody on social media was like, oh, she's so cute. And she began to travel with me. So I was doing, my girl conferences, my empowerment conferences for the Princess Within Foundation. So she began to travel with me. We traveled to Chicago. Everybody fell in love with her. And so I started talking to Dad, like, hey, Dad, if anything happens to her and we're on the plane or we're out of state, I'm going to need some kind of legal paperwork, in order if I have to take her to the hospital or, just to cover all aspects. And so we started talking about me becoming her legal guardian. And, if anything would happen to Dad, that she would come to me, that I would be able to make the decisions for her life. And so,
but even with that, Dr. Baker, isn't that big that you're taking on some responsibility? Yeah.
Totally major. But it happened so fast. I feel like God just kind of put it on my doorstep and didn't give me a whole lot of time to think about it. And even so, this happened in October. So it was October when I met her. By November, I was like, I think we're going to give her back. We're going to give her back. We're just going to give her a really good Christmas, and we're going to give her back.
Right.
Well, Dad ended up getting a full-time job, and so she ended up coming to me full-time because Dad didn't have the resources. And so we had the whole month of December together, and it was just like, this is a real baby. She is a hip baby. I have the day-to-day responsibilities. What are we going to do with this? And so my family by this time, they were a little worried. Okay, if they take the baby from you, you're not going to be able to handle it. And I was like, no, it'll be okay. If we don't give her back, it's totally fine. No big deal. So by January 2018, we had gotten in our routine. I was off for Christmas break. When I went back to school, back to work, January 17th, I had to put her in, I had to find a nanny.
Right.
And we just got into our routine. And so Dad and I began to talk about the adoption process. I was like, okay, I'm too far in. We need to talk about the legal process. And she needs a mother. She deserves the stability. She needs a mother. Her mother hasn't returned. She's not looking for her. Wow. So I'll just go ahead and accept the responsibility for this. By this time, we were attached at the hip. And if I didn't tell you the adoption story, you would know the adoption story.
Wow.
By way of our bond.
What does he say when you say, okay, I'm going to take her?
So Dad was open. He was open because, like I said, he did not have the resources. He had a history of not being able to provide for his children. He had about 6 other kids, and so this was nothing new to him. I won't say it was nothing new to him. I do feel like she was a lifesaver for him, but he knew in his heart of hearts that it was just a better fit for her to be with me. So he was hesitant. He had his moments where he was like, I don't want to do this. I want to rescind on the adoption. So he went back and forth, and I supported him the whole route. I was not trying to convince him to give me his daughter. Again, I had gotten a taste of it, and I knew that it was a full-time responsibility. I was a single woman. As a professor, the pay is not amazing. And I wasn't mentally prepared for it. I wasn't mentally prepared for it. I wasn't financially prepared for it. It was a lot to just get thrown into. But this little girl is so precious that I was just like, I can't afford to send her back into an environment where I don't know what's going to end up happening to her.
At some point, though, did you see little Bernada there? At some point, did you kind of put yourself in her position because you understood what instability meant in a real way?
So I did, and I understood what it meant, what it looked like firsthand to have a mother who was out doing her own thing, and you were just kind of left by the wayside. So my heart went out for her, and I don't think anything happens by happenstance. So come
No.
on, God, really, I don't grow up with my mother, and then you send me this little girl whose mother has left her. Talk about your ministry becoming your misery becoming your
Oh,
ministry.
wow.
And because I know God, because I know the voice of God, I was more convicted in my spirit that, because, this didn't happen just happenstance. I didn't just walk and she fell out the sky. She literally landed on my doorstep. So out of all the people in Houston, and you know how big Texas is,
Yes.
this little girl could have ended up with anybody. So I know without a doubt that God orchestrated our paths to cross for such a time as this. I don't know if I moved to Houston just to pick up Bella.
Wow.
But I'm here for it, and this has been an amazing whirlwind of a story, of a life, of an experience.
It is amazing. Dr. Baker, you have been phenomenal. Before we've got to go, give people your website and how they can connect with the Princess Within Foundation.
So you can find us at www.theprincesswithinfoundation.org. And, you can reach us there. And you can also Google me at www.bernadabaker.com.
Dr. Baker, you have been incredible. May God continue to bless the work of your hands, and may you continue to really strive for excellence in all of the young girls and young women that you touch in their lives.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and may you continue to be a blessing as well. I'll definitely keep you and your babies lifted in prayer.
Thank you so much. Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back right after this.